I miss Steel.
Let's go back. Back to the beginning.
Nostalgia trip.
Welcome. I'm here today with Kim, one of my college besties, back from the MSU days, and today we're going to talk about Phil Collins. Kim, can you intro Phil Collins for us?
Oh, the man, the myth, the legend, Phil Collins. God, I don't even know where to begin. I'm sure that you have a lot more information on actually him and like the history there than I do. But basically, I just want to intro him by saying he's the sound of the 80s, you know? And also, I would argue he's kind of the sound of the 90s because he still had music.
Have to agree.
Yeah, he still had music into the 90s. And even like the early 2000s, a lot of us were still listening to him. And I know I say a lot of us, like I was born in the late 90s, but like
yeah,
I was listening to him when I was growing up, and that's where I have this beautiful nostalgic love for the sound of the 80s, Phil Collins.
Yes, and I will say, like, I was so delighted, and I said this to you, I was delighted when you selected Phil Collins, because I let all of the guests on the show select what topic we're going to talk about, what topic is nostalgic for them, and I was like, yay, I'm so glad you picked Phil Collins, because I really associate Phil Collins with you, because you've always been very passionate about Mr. Phil Collins, and I really respect that. So, okay, let me just flesh out Phil Collins here. I don't know why anyone wouldn't know who Phil Collins is, but just in case.
Mm-hmm.
Drummer, singer, songwriter, actor, music producer extraordinaire, has more top 40 singles than any other artist of the 1980s. Mostly known for his solo work and also his work with the band Genesis. Has hits from both Genesis and solo. His biggest hits include In the Air Tonight, one of the greatest drum breaks of all time, Against All Odds, One More Night, Another Day in Paradise, You'll Be in My Heart, Easy Lover, so many songs. It goes on and on and on and on and on. So that's the overview here of Phil Collins. To start it off, what is your favorite Phil Collins song?
Okay, I knew you were going to ask this question,
Yes.
and I knew that my first instinct is to say In the Air Tonight, because obviously it is, in essence, it's his greatest song.
Yes.
But I am like a really big fan. There's this song called Long, Long Way to Go.
Okay.
And I do think that I had it on that playlist that I sent you.
You did, yes.
Long, Long Way to Go. So that song is from his Face Value album. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, that song is from No Jacket Required.
Okay.
Which is, it tends to be called his best album of all time. I think Face Value is his best album.
That was one of my questions as well. We'll circle back to Face Value. That is an album. But please continue on that song then.
Long, Long Way to Go is really good. It's got a really funky start to it that I'm still kind of like, I don't know how I feel about the start. Like the first like 10, 15 seconds are kind of like, is this like a royalty-free sound? But the rest of it is really classically filled, classically funkies and 80s. And sort of the whole gist of the lyrics of that song are talking about like shit sucks in, you know, in life and in politics and kind of in just the world. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to ignore it. But, well, it's not that it's hard to ignore it, but like that's what we all do, you know? A lot of times we just click it off. He has this line that he repeats about like turn it off if you want to, you know, switch it off, it'll go away. And it's like, and that still applies. That's an 80s song, and it still applies today because we're looking at everything in the world through the lens of our phone. So literally switch it off, turn it off, like it's the same thing. But I don't know, that song, it just gets to me because sometimes, you know, there's good and bad in life, but there's so much bad sometimes. And, you know, unfortunately there are things that you can do to sort of help in your life, in your community, and in the world. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times just the only solution that we have available to us as humans is to ignore it and move on. And like he presents that in a way that does kind of make you feel guilty for it, but also makes you sort of realize the fact that, again, when it comes down to it, sometimes that's all we can do is kind of shut it off and look away. Because, you know, how you can't go 68 miles to somebody being murdered and save them from being murdered, you know?
You just got to put it behind you sometimes because
Yeah.
life is heavy. Yeah.
Life
And
is heavy. Yeah.
I will say this too. So you sent me that playlist of the hits and like the deeper cuts of Phil Collins, and I of course listened to it in preparation for this. And that was one of the songs that stuck out with me. I would not say that I'm a Phil
yeah?
Collins expert, but I listened to that song, I'm like, I like that song, and I liked it to add to my liked playlist on Spotify because I liked that song. So
Aw.
thank you for sharing that song with me.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Of course, like I said, of course I'm familiar with Phil Collins. I am not insane, but some of the deeper cuts, I was not quite as familiar with that one, and I liked that song. So thank you for sharing that. But on that, you're going to talk about, you mentioned like his songwriting, some of his lyricism, and I think Phil Collins fits in like an interesting songwriting space for being someone who I would consider to be a megastar of the 80s, 90s music world. It's like this weird amalgamation of dad yacht rock, but also something that's like a little bit more progressive.
Yeah.
Because he's arguably a very prog rock drummer, which we'll talk about later. I want to talk about his drumming style a little bit later. But lyrically, he's in a weird space where he's a little bit deep and a little bit heavy, but also very yacht rocky. And I think that's what makes him so successful, because it's very accessible, but also still intelligent songwriting. And I think that's what makes him so talented. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. And while you kind of like broke down sort of his lyrical style as an artist, I want to also mention that as I was like running through, jotting down some notes about what I wanted to talk about, I made this comparison of Phil Collins to Taylor Swift. And I think it really holds up the more that I think about it, because kind of in that same way, obviously he was in his time a very popular artist.
Yes.
A lot of his lyrics are like, I'm not good at talking about music, but they're easy to follow, and they can like really hit hard sometimes like that.
Yeah.
But then he also has like so many classic romantic ballads that are just heavy and just make you think about the one who got away, or what could have been, or anything else. And yeah, so I wanted to like also add in, totally agree with what you said, but I wanted to add in like kind of in the same way that Taylor Swift is today to music, in a similar way that Phil Collins was in like the 80s, 90s to music.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. And I think it, obviously what makes Taylor Swift so successful is a broad appeal for her music. And, she writes music that is very accessible to a lot of people, but it's also like good enough that people also actually appreciate her as a musician too. It's not just like junk that people listen to for fun. It's actually like fairly intelligent pop music. And I think, I would consider Phil Collins to be a little bit more on the rock side of pop, but it's still in the pop realm. It's definitely not like heavy rock. So I think in that instance, I think that's what makes him work so well, and people want to listen to him because it's very accessible. Are you more of a Genesis girl, or are you more of a solo work person? Like where do you fall on the Phil Collins spectrum?
So I unfortunately know absolutely nothing about Genesis.
Okay, so that answers the question.
I've only ever been like straight up exposed to Phil Collins, and obviously like I have the internet at my fingertips. If I really wanted to go deep dive into Genesis, I could. But I think it's just something about his solo work that is really, really stuck with me throughout my life.
And then interesting point to that. So just to give some context around Genesis, a very major rock band, British rock band, primarily famous in the 80s. Original lead singer was Peter Gabriel, who I think modern people probably more associate with like Boombox Song and Say Anything. Yes, Mr. Peter. I really like Peter Gabriel. Sledgehammer is a banger. One of the best music videos of all time is Sledgehammer as well. But Phil Collins took over for him as lead singer after Peter Gabriel departed Genesis, and he had previously already been the drummer. So he was a drummer before he was a singer, and then stepped into that role. And In the Air Tonight, which is I think easily the most Phil Collins of all Phil Collins songs, was originally supposed to be a Genesis song. And the band said, nah, we don't want to put it on our album. And so he put it on his solo album. And obviously that worked out really well.
That's so like embarrassing though for Genesis.
I know.
Like I'm sure every time they hear it, they're like, oh fuck.
I know,
but at the same time, they're also like proud of their guy.
They're probably like, oh, damn it. Like, why didn't we just take the song? But I feel like that you hear stuff like that happening all the time in rock, especially like these guys with these egos want to just do it the way they want,
Right, yeah.
I definitely think in the United States as well, Genesis is not quite as famous as they are like across the pond. I think they're a bit more of a British band It's kind of a similar, I think, to like Oasis is like a massive band in the UK, but they're maybe not quite as famous in the US. But Genesis is definitely
There's like one hit each, right? Like the only Oasis song I know is Wonderwall.
Yeah, but like
right?
in the
and
UK,
then the only Genesis song I know is Invisible Touch.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's like a similar thing because across the pond, like Oasis is one of the biggest bands of all time. Like they are way more famous than they are here, which is interesting. But anyway, so that's my Genesis context. I wanted to make sure that I shared a little bit about Genesis because I also would not say I'm quite as familiar with Genesis. I think, again, that's a little bit more like US of us to be more familiar with just Phil Collins. So really, I think to me, the heart of the nostalgia from Phil Collins comes from his work on animated films.
Yes.
That specifically came out around our infancy. So specifically Tarzan, but he also did the soundtrack for Brother Bear, which I liked as a kid. So can you talk a little bit about do you like the Tarzan soundtrack? Like,
Yeah. Oh my God. Of course I do.
Yeah. Is that integral to your Phil Collins nostalgia?
I think there's definitely parts of it that are. It's weird.
Okay.
Like I definitely discovered Phil Collins before my exposure to Tarzan. But obviously the Tarzan soundtrack fucking slaps. I'm glad that there are still so many memes today about like how incredible it is and how fucking hard Phil Collins went on that. But like, yeah, so I would say yes and no. It's like what I love about Phil Collins and kind of how, how he's been in my life, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
Is like it comes from a lot of the more like on the radio kind of stuff. And I can talk about that later. But definitely like with Tarzan, I think that helped solidify it a lot. And specifically that one song, oh fuck, I'm forgetting it.
Is it You'll Be in My Heart?
Yes. I had like the first couple times I heard that song, I remember like struggling with it. I remember being like, this is like really cheesy and dumb and like skip to the fun parts because I was a kid. Yeah. But like it grew on me more and more. And of course, the more that I loved Phil Collins, the more that I loved all of his songs by extension. And then, so you mentioned Brother Bear.
Yes.
So I do remember his stuff in Brother Bear.
Yeah.
I don't think, this is controversial, I don't think he went as hard in Brother Bear as he went in Tarzan.
No, I would agree.
But there is one song, I think it's On My Way.
Yep.
Yeah,
yep.
It's On My Way in Brother Bear.
Yep.
Love that song. Yep. And when I drove out here to California, because I drove straight from Michigan, I did
with your cat.
Yeah, 3 straight days of driving with me and my cat and an incredibly long playlist. And Phil Collins was on that playlist, of course.
Of course.
And specifically the song On My Way from Brother Bear. Because it's like, it fits so well. It's like, look at me, I'm on my way.
That's a good story. That's a good nostalgia story.
Yeah.
I have like a childhood core memory of, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but like Disney did this thing when we were kids where they would put all of the soundtracks on cassettes. But then you also could get like this little book that accompanied the cassette. So it was like a picture book that was like a spiral ring picture book that would go with all of the cassettes. So I had Toy Story and Lion King and I had Tarzan. So Tarzan was one of the ones I would listen to. And I loved You'll Be in My Heart. And I just thought Tarzan was very hot. So Tarzan was like very hot.
Oh my God,
so I just really wanted to watch Tarzan all the time. And I listened to the soundtrack a lot, I think, because I thought Tarzan was really hot. So that's just like a core childhood memory of mine as well.
Men, take notes. Go back to your birth. Be raised in the jungle. Speak very little English. Because that's what we want.
George of the Jungle.
George of the Jungle's so hot.
Brendan
but
Fraser.
Also that's Brendan Fraser.
The Brendan Fraser renaissance is also right now, so.
Dude, can you imagine if Phil Collins had done the soundtrack
to George of the
Jungle?
If only. I feel like Brendan Fraser would be more famous than he is currently if that would have been the case, because it would have been an elevated film.
Yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that Phil Collins did win an Oscar for You'll Be in My Heart. That won Best Song the year that it came out.
Hell yeah.
And a fun piece of trivia that I saw was, so they beat out Trey Parker and Matt Stone, creators of South Park, for Best Song that year, because that was the year that the South Park movie also came out. And they were mad, like jokingly mad at him, so they made fun of Phil Collins like in South Park episodes for years after, and I just thought that was a funny little piece of trivia.
What song were they nominated for?
I don't remember the name
South
of
Park
the
song.
Yeah, there's like a song in
okay,
South
that's
Park.
why.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally not like a huge South Park fan. Like, I respect it, it's just not like my favorite animated.
I've got like an on and off with it.
Yeah, it's like fine. So just some random trivia that I wanted to throw in here about Mr. Phil Collins as well.
Yeah.
His full name is Philip David Charles Collins.
Aw.
So he is a famous person who goes by his real name, which I respect. He doesn't have like a stage name. As a child, he wanted to be an actor. He went to acting school. He appeared in London's West End production of Oliver.
Ooh.
He was like a very dedicated actor. And he's appeared in cameos in a lot of TV shows. He was in an episode of Miami Vice. He was in all kinds of stuff back in the 80s. And he met multiple wives throughout acting. Like, he seemed to like acting was like a very integral part of his life. And I thought that was interesting. But my favorite piece of trivia is that he is extremely passionate about the Alamo.
What? How did I never know this? What?
Say, did you know this? The Battle of the Alamo. He has collected hundreds of artifacts from the Alamo, and he's written a book about the Alamo as well.
Wow. I hope he has a tattoo somewhere that says "Remember the Alamo."
If only. I hope so. I hope so too, because that would just be quite delightful.
Ooh, you might have this on your notes, but I do have like a little side note about Phil Collins that's like kind of a fun fact.
Please.
So, and you know, I don't know how true this is. I saw a couple of articles, but I didn't like super check my sources. But supposedly that like iconic dissonant drum sound that we know from like In the Air Tonight, obviously, was actually created by accident. And so going forward, the official term for that sound is gated reverb.
Okay.
And it kind of became also like the sound of the 80s, right? Like a lot of artists use that. But supposedly the story goes, he was in the studio recording, I think it was In the Air Tonight that he was recording.
Yeah.
And he had a microphone that the microphone was meant for him to talk to the guys in the studio.
Okay.
Right? Like between cuts, be like, how do you think that was? You know, whatever. But that microphone was accidentally on. And the sound of that microphone was meant to like tone down certain sounds and tone up certain sounds kind of thing. But yeah, it was accidentally on, and they liked the sound so much they kept it, and it became absolutely fucking iconic.
Literally one of the most iconic drum sounds in music history, really. I mean, everybody knows the drum break in Into the Air Tonight. It's the best.
God,
it's so good.
And I got to see it live. Did I mention that?
Wait, what?
Yeah, okay. I got to go see Phil Collins 2019. It was like end of 2019. I know. I spent stupid amount of money getting tickets to this, but like,
I just spent a lot of money on Taylor Swift. So you know what?
Yeah, perfect. Oh, congratulations. Hell yeah.
I made it through the fight. The dog fight to get Ticketmaster.
Your eyes. You're like, I've seen war.
Girl, I did it. Anyway, tell me about it.
But yeah, got to go see Phil Collins at the last show of his Not Dead Yet tour, which incredible naming convention.
Incredible, yes.
And it was in Las Vegas. We drove out there, saw the concert, drove back, like didn't do any Vegas things. But yeah, so we drove to Vegas, went to see the concert, drove back, literally did nothing else Vegas but Phil Collins, and God, I fucking loved it. And it was kind of funny too, because we were clearly the youngest people there. I mean, like, I'm, mid-20s kind of thing. But, like, I don't think anybody else there was under the age of at least 35.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and it was nice because, like, we could sit down in chairs and listen to the music and not, like...
I love that vibe at concerts, though. I love being the youngest person there. It's so fun.
Yes. I can't wait to be old. I can't wait to be like, yeah, guys, let's just chill.
When I saw Fleetwood Mac, it was incredible because I got to sit down for Fleetwood Mac and I was on the floor seat. And so there wasn't any tall people in front of me.
It was great.
I know. It was, let's just sit down. Anyway, so you got to see Phil Collins live. That's amazing. And so that's extra special because he's no longer touring. He recently announced that he will no longer be playing live ever again. So you got to see it toward the end of his career. That's amazing.
And I got a t-shirt.
As you should. I mean, when you see your heroes, you gotta get...
Exactly. And it was... Okay, so during the concert, I do want to mention real quick, it does make sense that, like, he's, kind of discontinuing concerting and everything. And he's very old anyways, especially for
he has a spinal injury as well, which is why he's retiring.
So while I was speaking, like, we were all sitting down, kind of just enjoying the music, not having to, like, crush into each other kind of thing. Because of his spinal injury, because he can't really drum anymore. He can, but he can't. Not to the degree that he used to.
Yeah.
He was mainly sitting in a chair singing the whole time, which was kind of silly and it was kind of funny. But it was like, oh, he's just so iconic. Like, he gets away with it, Like any other artist.
No, yeah, you get to, like, you got to breathe the same air as Phil Collins for a couple hours. And that...
I did.
Yeah.
And he did In the Air Tonight, and my life was fucking
That's
complete.
amazing. I didn't know you had seen him. That's really special. That's amazing. I love that.
10 out of 10.
So speaking of live performances, another fun fact that I wanted to chat about a little bit. How familiar are you with Live Aid, the concert Live Aid back in the 80s?
All I know of it is from the Bohemian Rhapsody
Sure.
movie.
So first of all, I would highly recommend watching Live Aid. It's an incredible live concert. This was something that I grew up watching. It's like generally kind of nostalgic for me because my dad really liked the Live Aid performance. So Live Aid was in 1985. It was meant to raise money for starving children in Africa. A little bit controversial where the funds went to, but that's neither here nor there. That's not what we're talking about today.
Ooh.
There's some really cool, I think Not Past It is a podcast, and they did an episode about that side of it. Anyway, but overall, really cool concert that had a lot of super famous people in it. But Phil Collins performed both in London and in the US because there were 2 Live Aid concerts. One was in London, one was in the US, and he did both in the same day. So he performed in London, hopped on the Concorde, and then flew to Philadelphia on July 13th, 1985. He did both.
God, can you imagine
Which I
how
think is
your
really cool.
forearms would hurt so fucking bad after that?
I know. So iconic. So he,
Wow.
in Philadelphia, which is where the US concert was, he played drums for Eric Clapton, who is also very problematic now, but that's also neither here nor there. And then he played a solo set.
Right.
And then he sat in for John Bonham, the late John Bonham, when Led Zeppelin played their performance as well.
Damn.
So super iconic.
Nice, Phil.
But
Nice.
yeah, check out Live Aid, dude. Live Aid slaps. And I mean, if you've seen Bohemian Rhapsody, Freddie Mercury's performance is arguably one of the greatest live performances like in human history. It's like genuinely very moving to watch his real live performance at Live Aid. So I would really recommend watching it if you haven't seen the real thing. It's like actually pretty incredible. It's
Nice.
yeah, no, like Live Aid's kind of awesome. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that because I do remember like Phil Collins being part of that, and that's something that's nostalgic for me because Live Aid's really sick. So check that out. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Phil Collins as a drummer, like his drumming skills, his style. I think he has a really fantastic singing voice, really unique voice.
And a really unique singing voice.
Yes.
I gotta say, nobody can do Phil.
No, I agree. But he also is a highly talented drummer. As I mentioned earlier, he's considered a little bit more on the progressive side, so prog rock. And several of rock's greatest drummers have noted him as an influence, including Neil Peart, who's the drummer for Rush, was the drummer for Rush. Also, sick drummer. Taylor Hawkins, R.I.P., drummer Foo Fighters, said he was really highly influenced by Phil Collins. John Bonham, who I mentioned earlier, my favorite band of all time is Led Zeppelin. He was the drummer for Led Zeppelin, mentioned that he highly respected Phil Collins' artistry as well. What do you think makes Phil Collins so special as a drummer?
Oh, wow, that's a deep question. I love it. I want to say it's his trauma that really makes him like a special. No, I don't know.
Session now?
Probably. It's probably part of it. But I think that this is probably a lame answer, but I think at the core of it, Phil Collins is a drummer. And obviously we know him more as a musical artist in all these different senses, like you mentioned. But I think what makes him such a unique drummer is that like his heart and soul is in the drums, rather than anything else. And I think that's crucial because if your heart and soul is in one particular thing, even if you don't start out good at it, you're going to become good at it because it encompasses your life and it's your passion. So I think really just the core of the reason why he's so incredible as a drummer, so iconic and so, such an impact on the music industry today is that it was his soul. Like
he puts his heart into it.
He was
I would
a drummer.
agree with that. Yeah, like I think that's almost what ties into like the yacht rocky part of his music is it's a little on the cheesy side, but in such an earnest way.
Yeah.
That you really connect with it. But yeah, and I mean, just from my perspective too, like his drumming was really innovative. Like you mentioned earlier, like he was using techniques to work with his drumming in the studio that made it stand out and sound a little bit different. And I think that's really interesting. And, the 80s was really a time that people were incorporating more electronic effects into their sound. And he really was on the forefront of that, using that, especially in the Air Tonight being such a huge hit, really helped drive forward different types of drumming techniques that people did in the studio.
Yeah, and he might be one of like the founding fathers, so to speak, of the Yamaha DX7 keyboard, which the only reason I know anything about this at all is because I did Phil Collins research the past couple of years, just randomly. I'm
because
like,
you love
so
him,
curious.
of course, as one does.
Because I love him, exactly. So the Yamaha DX7 keyboard is just like your classic synth keyboard, right? But it was also crucial to the sound of the 80s, again, as I've been talking about. But I think that he was like one of the founding fathers of making that happen because he, of course, had his own DX7 keyboard and was just fucking around with it and playing with it and making incredible music. And, you know, that sound became iconic. So other people who either had that keyboard or, you know, were getting into music, like that was one of the factors that, like, what is it that I'm trying to say? But it's like, you know, when one person does it and then other people want to do it.
Right, yeah.
Like, he might not have been the first, but he was.
But he had the
for
influence,
sure
right? Like I
first.
mentioned earlier, he's one of the biggest artists of the 80s, right? If he's making hits with this instrument, then other people are going to want to use it as well. So, definitely.
Yeah. Kind of like when Hans Zimmer does some, you know, crazy fuckery with a weird instrument. All of a sudden, all other composers are like, "Ooh, I want to fuck with that. Yeah, that's
They're like,
cool.
I need a zither. You used a
yeah,
zither?
I need a zither."
Okay, so let's circle back here. Talk a little bit about your favorite albums.
Ooh, favorite albums. Okay, so I did mention, I think my number one favorite album is Face Value.
Yes.
I think it really just comes down to most of the songs on that album I fucking love, right? Like, if, you know, literally the number of songs I like on there.
Which In the Air Tonight is on.
It is.
In the Air Tonight is on that album.
Hold on. I might be getting myself confused for a second. I'm on Spotify right now.
So you can go check them out.
I might have to take this back. Oh no, you know what? I completely lied. Face Value is my second favorite album.
Okay, let's back it
Face
up.
Value is the one that is considered his best album. It does have In the Air Tonight on it. You're totally correct on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I do, of course, love that song. No shade against that song.
Of course.
No Jacket Required is the other one. That's the one that is my favorite album.
Which, that's a great name. I would just like to say that No Jacket Required is a great album name. But
Yeah.
I'm looking at the album cover now, and there's no jacket or weather visual on the album cover, and I feel like that could have been integrated better with the album name.
Right. And so, speaking of the album art, and here's also the reason why I got my albums confused a little bit. Every single fucking Phil Collins album is just a close-up on his face in like a slightly different angle with slightly different lighting, and I fucking love it.
Like, y'all, I'm literally clicking through his albums right now. So there's 12 Inchers, No Jacket Required, Hello, I Must Be Going, and Face Value are all just different close-ups of
And
Phil
both
Collins'
sides.
face.
The only album cover of his that's like genuinely different is Dance Into the Light.
Yeah, and there's also, but seriously, it's also his face. That's incredible. I love that theme for him.
It's so funny too because like he, you know, Spotify and everything came around and the music industry was kind of changing and how streaming happened. And he, of course, did all these remasters for his old albums, and he did all the album covers again. And I've got this collage up that I'm looking at right now. So it's again,
Oh, yes, I'm
just
looking
his
at that.
face next
Yep.
to like a slightly older version of his face.
And I also would like to preface this. Phil Collins is not like the hottest man.
No, he's just some guy.
And I appreciate, yeah, and he's kind of been balding since like 1982. And I respect that he just wants a close up of his face on his album. And he's like, this is going to sell 100 million copies anyway. And I respect that. He could have put all kinds of cool stuff on his album, but he chose his face. And I respect that.
He did every single time.
So, okay, let's talk about No Jacket Required.
Yeah, so No Jacket Required. Let me just go through it, right? Track number 1, Susudio. Love it. Who doesn't? It's a
Great.
made-up name. It's a made-up word. And he just fucking rolled with it. He said, I'm going to create a pop song about a girl, and I'm going to give her the name Susudio. Because why the fuck not? Who's going to stop me? I'm goddamn Phil Collins.
And
He
number
did
one
that.
hit in both the US and the UK as well.
Yes. Oh, so good. So that's the number 1 track. Love that song. A couple tracks down, my favorite song, Long, Long Way to Go, like we
Yes.
talked about.
Yes.
He also has One More Night on there.
Yep.
You guys, some of these titles, if you like are listening to them and you don't necessarily know them, I swear to God, the second you start it, the first 5 seconds, you'll be like, oh, I know that song.
Also
like-
another number one hit.
Yeah,
one
exactly.
hit.
Another number 1 hit, One More Night. Don't Lose My Number. Another like kind of underrated hit. It's still up there, but it's definitely not like in his top 10 or 20.
Yep.
Don't Lose My Number. That's a great fucking song. I really don't understand it, but like great song. And then towards the end of the album, we have another one of his classics, Take Me Home, which,
Of course.
going back to the fact that I saw him in concert, that was the last song on the set list, of course. And it feels like it too. The
Aw.
vibe of that song is like, hey guys, we're at the end credits, you know, this indie coming of age movie just finished up and you're feeling kind of like happy and cozy. So here's my Take Me Home song. So that's like the vibe of that song. And it
Interesting,
fits
though.
so well at the end.
I'm reading a little bit more about the song. Lyrics refer to a patient in a mental institution, so it's a little bit dark. Backing lyrics from Sting and Peter Gabriel. So some heavy hitters singing backup on that song as well.
Hell yeah. Rock on, Sting.
Yeah, rock on. Sting is cool. I like Sting.
Sting is cool. So yeah, I mean, honestly, it just like there's so many really solid hits on No Jacket Required. And like if we're getting
Indeed.
weirdly technical back on like the album cover art, it has like it's like the creepiest face of all the faces.
Also agreed.
He's like looking kind of downwards and it's like really, really orange lit, and it almost looks like it's like that like old black and white movie where it's in plague times. The Seventh Seal.
It does kind of give Seventh Seal vibes. And like
Yeah.
his hair is kind of poorly styled. It's really accentuating that he has a receding hairline on this album cover. And again, I respect it. I really do.
Yeah, it's creepy, and like, but the album is such like an iconic pop album.
No, it is.
It's so ironic.
I love it. What a
Ugh,
guy.
what a guy.
So
Good old
bringing
Phil.
it home here.
Yeah.
Can you kind of summarize for us what Phil Collins means to you? You could have picked any topic for this. Like I say pick whatever you want to chat about that's nostalgic. Why did you choose Phil Collins? What does he mean to you?
If I have to sum it up in a thesis statement, Phil Collins is a car ride. Phil Collins is any kind of car ride. I'd say he's a long road trip. Maybe he's just a trip to the grocery store sometimes. But he's a car ride. You know, you're in control. He's in the background, hanging out. I don't know. It's just, I mean, that's where I get kind of my nostalgic feel for it. Is I grew up on listening to him, you know, on the radio in my parents' car as we were driving somewhere. And it's always been associated in that sense for me. And, you know, another quick side note story. I don't know if you remember in college, his greatest hit CD was stuck in my car for a while.
I sure do remember that.
So it was just, you know, listening to that over and over again. And I love driving cars, and I, you know, everyone loves a good car ride when you've got like the time and the space and you're just plugging along, going somewhere at a distance in a quicker time it would take you any other way.
I also love a car ride, and that's a beautiful statement. I think that's so true. Like, we hold a lot of special moments in cars. You know, you're often going somewhere, right? You're heading to a destination that might mean something, but the way that you get there also could be a memory for you.
And sometimes it would seem like we've got a long, long way to go. Song title.
Good plug. I like that. And it against all odds,
against all odds. Take a look at me now. I don't know.
Against all odds, we've come to the end of our conversation. But Phil Collins will always be in our hearts.
Aww.
So thank you for
Yeah.
chatting with me today, Kim. This was fun.
Anytime. Thank you, man. Love being on the podcast.
Thank you for joining me on this nostalgia trip. If you liked what you heard, follow the podcast to keep tripping through time with us. And if you're feeling extra supportive, leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at NostalgiaTripPod for bonus content, episode release schedules, and more. Want to hear a certain topic or have a recommendation for the pod? Email us at nostalgiatrippod@gmail.com. Until next time,